for those who didn't make it. I guess, has anybody noticed an increase in buyer activity? I'd say so. Kristen, you wrote 20 over ask last week and got beat out by 37 over ask.
50 over ask. We were up to 37 over ask. We got beat out.
There you go. There you go. So that's kind of I think it's already begun the season, the spring season, spring, everybody has the New Year's resolution of getting a new house, and we're here now. So we're going to kind of go over some of the advanced techniques for, and really Kristen asked me about an escalation clause, which is then why I decided we should probably do this class. I'm going to share my screen. Everybody see mine? Yep, I believe you can. Here's what we'll cover: buyer thresholds and educating market. So basically what we're going to cover is market activity, buyers contingencies, post-closing occupancy agreement, early acceptance bonus, escalation clause, as-is clause, appraisal gaps, buyer pays title and closing, leveraging earnest money, backup contracts, listing agent advice, seller thresholds, lender support, funding strength, love letter, tight dates and deadlines, and packaging it all together. So we got quite the agenda today. I did actually pull, these are all stats from 2021, this bottom tile, and here's stats actually from this morning. So this was January 12th of 2021, and here is January 26th of 2023. I guess, do we see any difference between these 2 years? I mean, there's 2 years between it.
Twice as many closed and fewer new.
Well, twice as many closed. Yep. Well, we have 790 new as opposed to 550. So we have obviously increase in our listings. Price decreases is tremendously larger, 3 times larger. I like looking at these stats, and these are all, these are every 7 days that I look at these, but I think this is a good gauge on kind of where the market's at. If we have an increase in listings, but we have a decrease in closings, we're still closing almost as many. I mean, 1,223 over 550 new. That was a pretty heavy seller market. So it's softer. Price decreases are happening. My buyer needs 16,000 in concessions. It's possible. Any thoughts on stats? It is what it is. We'll jump right into buyer contingency. I guess just big picture. Anybody can you describe what a buyer contingency is? Who's got it? Mary, give me an answer. What's a buyer contingency?
Buyer needs to sell his house before he can buy a new house.
There you go. Buyer's got to sell a house before they can buy a new house. Questions: is the property under contract and set to close? Do they have photos? Is it even ready to be listed? Is it set for photos? Does your client have to do work before the property can be set for photos? I mean, these are really just, these are questions on both sides. So, a lot of today's conversation is what does this look like on both sides, both a listing agent and a buyer's agent? Is our buyer actually in a position to put their house on the market? I guess, do we believe buyer contingencies are going to make it these days? Thomas shook his head no. I say yes.
I got one. I'm a buyer.
Britt's under contract with a contingent buyer on her listing.
Well, contingencies, right? There's obviously significant number of contingencies. Are you specifically talking about, selling my home contingency?
There you go. Got a home to sell.
So you're talking about that one specifically?
That one specifically. It's a tough one.
I mean, I feel like if you presented that kind of data, like in your quote on on the bottom of the slide, then you would have a much better chance, but
Also taking the risk and
If you're not through inspection, I'm really, really, really hesitant.
So Thomas is saying that if the buyer's property is not under contract and through the actual inspection period, it's a sticky situation,
Yes.
right? Well, in Brittany's case, the property was how long? 140 days on market, to where when the seller got an offer finally that was contingent.
These are with 2 extra weeks to get them.
Right.
Let them-
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of one of those things. It's still possible. Any questions on buyer contingencies, either side, listing side or on a buy side? I think
What Brittany get in the quid pro quo for the buyer contingency? Other than just, oh my gosh, I got a contract.
oh my gosh, I got a contract.
2 weeks to get their house done,
Unmute.
then you have to.
So was there a quid pro quo?
My microphone doesn't work.
Come over here. Microphone won't work.
Guys,
Oh, hey, how'd you get here?
All right, so you got a buyer contingency for selling their property. Was it under contract already? And what did you get for quid pro quo? What did you get in return for that?
It was just listed, it was opening weekend, but again, I have a property in Heather Gardens on the market for several months. We basically gave them 2 weeks to get it under contract. If they cannot, we will go back on the market. They get their earnest money back. My client felt like, what's 2 weeks? We've been on the market for so long. I also felt like, okay, if we get through the 2 weeks and we have to relist, it's like a new listing on the market. And maybe that's also something that we need in a couple weeks to be kind of fresh back in everybody's MLS on their search. So we felt like it was the best decision for him.
So you got a 2 week limitation.
2 weeks to get it done.
All right, I'm kind of cool with that.
so if a strong selling point it is on a contingency is that they're at least through inspection. If you have a client that you know is going to be contingent, does it behoove them to get an inspection on the house before they even? I mean, I guess it's not like the buyer's inspector, but at least then they can say, this is what, you know what I mean? Like,
I feel like overall, homeowners have a pretty good idea of the condition of their home as far as major defects. I might recommend maybe just a sewer scope, because you know that will pop up and that could potentially be a huge expense and take time. But I don't think a full inspection is necessary.
okay. That's a good idea.
Any questions, thoughts on buyer contingencies, specifically a home to sell? Done, moving on. Here's buyer contingency verbiage, I guess. And kind of like in Britt's scenario, the actual buyers put that forth in their offer. Give us till this date, give us 2 weeks to get this under contract. On a listing side, if they don't include that, which it's not really a buyer's responsibility to put that deadline. So I think on the listing side, you definitely want to make sure that there is that window of under contract,
Where your seller has the opportunity to terminate and it's not just tying up the property. Another thing that was really attractive about the offer is they front loaded all the deadlines. Their inspection termination is within 7 days. So they're definitely on top of it to where by next Friday, they don't have any other outs except if they can't get their home under contract. So definitely front loading those deadlines makes your clients look really dedicated.
the buyer.
The buyer,
Sure.
if you're on the buy side.
And as far from that seller, you got the 2 week limitation. Literally a contract for purchasing property is who is going to do what by when. So when you do not include by when, you are so open for other residual issues to come up. Like Brittany's saying, you're locked up. You're basically locked up under contract because the seller has no way to terminate. So
Right.
it's always who's doing what by when.
And by when is
Yes.
yeah. And that's I think more work on the listing side of things. It's not about their that is, but it's the selling agent's responsibility to make sure it's included. Moving on, buyer contingency verbiage. I'll share obviously all these tiles with everybody so you can utilize this as well. Post-closing occupancy agreement. Anybody describe it? Kristen, what's a post-closing occupancy agreement?
It's when the person who's selling the house needs to stay in it after the sale. So it's basically like they're renting it back.
And what's our permitted or what's the duration? How long are we, I guess technically
60 days.
up to 60 days?
If the buyers are purchasing with a loan, it's 60 days max.
So, okay. So if they're purchasing with cash, it could,
Be whatever.
okay.
Well, and why is that?
That's because if you're purchasing with a loan, it's your primary residence. You can't turn it into a rental property, so they give you the 60-day allowance.
So I might have this scenario coming up, sorry to take up so much time, but if somebody is purchasing it as an investment property, then can the post-closing go longer than 60 days?
But it's an investment property at that point anyway.
As long as they're not purchasing as a primary with a loan.
Okay.
And let's be honest, who would know if it extended past 60 days? Elements to consider to protect your buyer, or here's seller benefits. Extra time in the home after closing. Seller has funds to avoid sales contingencies in some cases, meaning the seller got their money and now can go shop, or maybe needs that 60 days to spend time shopping and close on a new property. Elements to consider on the buy side, number of days allowed, no cost or cost per day for the post-closing agreement, early move out, how to distribute funds in that event, security deposit, who holds and how much. I think security deposits are one of the stickier things.
But it now says in the post-doc that the seller holds it,
The buyer holds it,
but the buyer holds it.
right? So the buyer holds security deposit. I'll give you a scenario that I encountered where the buyer put it in the contract that the title company was going to hold the security deposit. And at closing, the title company told everybody that they weren't holding the security deposit, which I didn't say anything, obviously, as the selling agent. Once the buyers found out that they didn't have a security deposit, they were pretty upset about it, but that was their agent's bad, I believe, not mine.
Not fun.
Not fun. Renters and liability insurance. I think that's kind of a must on your buyer's side, ensuring that those sellers have it. And I think one of the things that gets overlooked is security deposits and copy of actual proof of copy of those insurance documents. And those need to be presented at closing. The security deposit delivered to the buyer, as well as those renters policies and liability insurance policies. Any thoughts, comments on that piece? I think it's the two things that get missed all the time, and that's the security deposit and the renter's insurance policy. Any questions about post occupancy agreement? Anybody?
When you suggest itself, where it says like possession date, would you put C post occupancy agreement?
Reference post occupancy agreement, right? Because what if that changes? What if that shifts? What if it moves?
I remember when Matt got the post, like the date, he got like 60 days in his possession, but then they never executed a post occupancy agreement, and then the buyer are closing said, well, we want X amount of money. And it was never discussed. And then in the contract itself, it said that they had the 60 days.
So I think what this is, I think this is actually a good point though, is executing the post occupancy agreement at the beginning of the contract. And if you were delivered a post occupancy agreement with no buyer signature, I wouldn't sign the contract until you have both buyer signatures on the post doc agreement and on the contract to buy. And the scenario that Brittany's bringing up, the buyers didn't sign the post doc, and then the day of closing wanted to change the terms of the post occupancy agreement, but there was no post occupancy agreement because the agent didn't have the buyer sign, but the seller did sign. Either way, it ended up working out, but it was more work for him than just having it signed at the beginning. Comments, post occupancy agreement? Questions? What's a seller's acceptance bonus? What's a seller acceptance bonus? Anybody used one?
Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Oh, little kid in the front. Thomas, what'd you use it for?
I would try to avoid competition. So basically, if all the offers are due to be reviewed on Monday, I'm gonna throw them whatever, 5 grand, 10 grand, if they execute before Sunday morning at 9 a.m. If not, my offer is still open, but it does not include the seller's signing bonus.
Did that make sense to everybody? Does it work?
It did.
I think, here's the thing that I remind everybody on the buy side is usually the selling agents are usually the ones that are muscling around and setting these dates and deadlines of, oh, Monday acceptance, Tuesday acceptance. Realistically, most sellers don't want to keep being pushed out of their home all weekend long. So if they get a strong offer, they're usually willing to probably move forward and accept it, whereas you're hearing something completely different from a listing agent. So just because you hear one thing doesn't mean that something else isn't possible. Did you have a thought, Kristen?
Oh, sorry, I was just saying that that's a good idea.
Well,
Or-
it avoids you sitting there hoping and wishing and crossing your fingers. I got a question for you, Thomas. We have to present as listing agents all offers, but is there a duration or a time frame within what is that presenting all offers window?
Well, you're supposed to be presenting them as they come in. You're forwarding them to your buyer. You're not collecting them and holding them until Monday morning and handing them to your seller. If you've done that, I would call that professional negligence, because it's supposed to be passing them on as soon as they're received.
So the reason I bring it up is do we believe that it happens every time? Probably
Ha.
not.
Ha,
Right.
ha.
Right.
Because I need time to make a spreadsheet.
Send a PDF for them to review.
You can send them a spreadsheet after you've kind of received all your offers before the deadline. But my acceptance deadline still stands for the seller's acceptance bonus. If you want to take time to make your spreadsheet, that's fine. But when they look at that offer and they see that they lost the opportunity for a acceptance bonus, why?
Oh, because I waited till Monday.
Oh, because it was accepted upon receipt. Yeah, learn your contract offer and acceptance basics.
There you go. I think seller's acceptance bonuses is something that would help, in that competitive situation. Kristen, if we had incorporated this, we may have gotten the one at 20,000 over. I mean,
Yeah, because until we were ahead all Saturday until things got hairy around like 3:50.
you were ahead until you weren't. Yeah. So I think a seller's acceptance bonus is definitely a good tool to use when you're in that competitive scenario. It's kind of first in, and I always ask, and this is something I shared with Kristen, I always ask, hey, we're first in, can we be first countered as well? Make sure to check out our acceptance bonus if they are willing to sign by this weekend. So if you included an acceptance bonus with a deadline, can you also put an acceptance date that's reflective to the Monday, Tuesday request?
Oh, absolutely. It's two separate. It is an addition, but my acceptance deadline is still at the bottom. It's just that in additional provisions, we're going to add additional consideration to the purchase price if executed before, Sunday 0900 MST.
And that's my point, I think, is including, in respecting the acceptance deadline, Monday, Tuesday, like you were requested. Hey, give us a Monday, Tuesday deadline. Well, that's fine. We also did include an acceptance bonus that is accelerated or front loaded. So remembering those don't have to be the same date. Your acceptance bonus is not the same date as your acceptance of the contract. So you can still respect the wishes of that listing agent.
Absolutely. As well as because of that acceptance bonus, it's got to be in front of the seller.
Right.
If it never sees the seller, some may be aggrieved. Why didn't you get this to me?
Right. Why didn't you tell me?
Why'd you pocket them all?
Right.
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful spreadsheet. I love how you change hues of yellow between, second and third place.
Gradient. Seller acceptance bonus, I think it's a big one. I think it's a cherry on top. It also kind of separates you from your peers. Escalation clause, to use or not to use. What's our thoughts on escalation clause? Good, bad, and different. Anybody have any experience? Thomas, you have experience. What's your experience?
I don't have experience because I refuse to use it. I see
And
too much risk associated with it.
And I don't use them either. I think it kind of shows your hand without you actually presenting a hand. Oh, we can go up this high. Well, why didn't you?
And you have a brilliant counter proposal, don't you?
So I end up listing more homes than I end up representing buyers. And anytime somebody sends me an escalation clause on my listing, we counter at that price. You said you could go up this high. We're now countering you first. We're going to give you first pick. If you want to go up that high, here you go. Here's your counter. So if you gave me an escalation clause, I would only use that as your counter.
And if they don't sign the counter proposal, it's somewhat of a quote unquote bluff.
Kind of, right.
Don't worry, I'll write you an offer.
I don't want Thomas's offer.
Well, I'll write you an offer, and then you can send that over to them and call it the word's escaping me, but an actual offer.
Right.
And that's the risk I won't take, because I don't want your brother-in-law signing through CTM contracts to provide me with a quote unquote competing offer that you're going to represent is an actual offer. And then boom, that escalation clause is automatically kicked in.
There you go. Any questions on escalation clause? Buyer escalation thresholds to purchase price, buyer purchase limits, maximum purchase price, proof of competing offers and how to receive them, how it works at the end. Seller counters the price and the terms agreed. Here's verbiage.
Must have maximum price.
Must have maximum price. And I'll tell you, that's where I had a buyer get into. I had an issue because the buyer said, I think specifically it said at least will it will cover the gap of at least $5,000. They ended up having to cover, I think it was like 12,000, and they said no, we're only doing 5,000. But I said, but in your actual contract you put that they would pay at least $5,000, as opposed to we'll pay no more than $5,000.
So Thomas, what would happen? Let's say you went in at 550 with an escalation clause with no back, and they countered your client at 560, and they were like, no, I want it. Can't you just not sign the counter?
Correct.
So if there wasn't a match, it's not like they're obligated.
Mhm.
Right? I'm just wanted to double check.
If there's a counter offer, you did not accept my offer.
I had one on my first listing that came through saying they'll give $1,000 over each offer that's higher than their offer with no limit. So they offered, I think it was 10,000 over the asking price, with the escalation clause saying every offer that is over their offer, they'll go up 1,000 over that offer, and there's no limit. So basically, that eliminated anyone else trying to, if they went up 50,000, apparently this buyer would go, 51,000.
Yes, that
Yep.
buyer would go 51,000 and then terminate on inspection.
You're right. Right. I think, another big thing to consider on this too is does the buyer have the cash to cover an appraisal gap? I mean, sorry, the escalation clause. Do they have the cash to actually,
Well, if it doesn't.
if it doesn't appraise, I guess is where I was going with it, right?
Or
I
their
guess,
loan officer says you're crazy. You were only good for an additional 20,000.
but we want this house. In regard to Deb's example where the buyer's willing to go 1,000 over any other offer, is $1,000 enough to tickle somebody? I don't know if it is. In my mind, I always recommended that my buyers go $2,500 over, something more than $1,000 and hundreds of thousands of dollars here is peanuts. So I think the escalation, clause needs to include increments larger than just $1,000 increments. We'll go 2,500, we'll go 5,000 over. But that would just be my advice.
And you're gonna have to look at the inspection clause to see whether or not that they're going to try to claw back that $1,000 anyway.
Totally. And that's kind of the strategy. Oh, we'll make it up in the end. We'll nickel and dime them through the inspection period. Did that make sense to anybody? And I think that's part of the caution too. But I would also guide your buyers not to behave that way. That's not how this works. Health and safety. Thomas raised his little eyebrows.
Well, I
like-
love health and safety.
Right. We're only going to consider health and safety items. Right. Escalation clause, helpful, useful. I think I think if you were to utilize it, I would do increments larger than 1,000. I would make it attractive if you were to be using it. But then once again, I think the escalation clause just helps the listing agent know where your thresholds are, where your buyer is willing to go. So I think beware. I think if it was me, I ask my buyers just to put their best foot forward. Let's do it or don't. Like if you want it, we need to be competitive. Let's put it forward.
And I just keep well, if the listing agent's willing to communicate. So I wrote 2 offers, was it last weekend or the weekend before? And we ended up resubmitting both times. We resubmitted, we were the first ones in. Another offer came in and then we ended up resubmitting and coming up with better terms for the seller. Just depends on the listing agent, I suppose, though.
If they're sharing.
Yeah.
Thoughts, comments, escalation clause? Anybody have any questions? Inspection waiver. Thomas, do you include inspection waivers?
I have limited inspection waivers. I would never, I have one client only who I would allow to waive inspection.
And I guess why would you not encourage why would you discourage that inspection waiver?
This one's still the wide open one that you can basically, you can get out on inspection as long as you timely submit that document. As long as that termination is timely submitted, you are out. I've had agents contact where I was working as an attorney. Agent contacts me and says, why? I'm like, look in the contract. There's 5 reasons. You pick which one works best for you.
Right. I shared everything I can.
All we needed to do was submit it timely. It was submitted timely. That contract is canceled.
What's the difference between including the verbiage, the as-is verbiage that's here, and still including your inspection, objection, and resolution deadlines?
You're always going to include that. So I do an inspection, right? Buyer shall limit any inspection objection to health and safety, structural issues, or any other anticipated repair in excess of $500.
There you go.
Buyer, but in no way is buyer waiving or does not waive its rights under section 10.3, period.
And I think that that's kind of my point is I think including the as is verbiage has to still include rights of objection and resolution. Um, you know, some listing agents might push back on that. Oh no, we want a contract without an objection or resolution. That's where you could still include your termination deadline, but maybe not include the objection and resolution. But every time I've ever used the as is verbiage or the as is clause, I included in the additional provisions that they're willing to purchase the property as is, where is, and with all faults, with health and safety items only being considered, and still include the objection and resolution.
Absolutely. Must
Yep.
have objection and resolution.
And if nothing, you have to at least still have your termination deadline.
Oh, yes, I have one client only who I would allow to not inspect. And you have to do the sewer. That
There you
is
go.
the $150 insurance policy that pays off immediately. We all buy
Right.
insurance that we do not want to use. That's a $150 policy that pays off on the day that you actually do the inspection. So you have to do the sewer inspection.
Any questions, I guess, about the inspection waiver? I think the biggest piece to remember here is including the verbiage. I think it gives warm and fuzzies to the sellers. You know, it shows your desire and intentions to move forward and keep things, you know, simple and straightforward. But I think the caveat is making sure you still include the deadlines. If an agent asks you to not include the deadlines, I think that that's your buyer's decision, but I would strongly advise against it. Any thoughts, questions, inspection waiver?
As a seller, I send back, buyer is purchasing property as is, where is, and with all faults. Seller has no intention upon making any additions, repairs, or improvements, period.
I know an agent that had a buyer that said, they sent a screenshot of a shower door and they said, hey, Brittany, hey, Brittany, how can we get the sellers to put this shower door in for us? What? What?
I knew they were gonna be difficult.
You buy it as is, where is, and with all faults.
Now, granted, my language that I just referenced says seller has no intention.
No intention, but it doesn't mean that there isn't an option. And
Does
that's
not say
something
seller shall not.
right, that's different.
Well, it still says I'm going to make no additions, repairs, or improvements, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to give you back, $2,300 in concessions.
Or price reduction or what have you.
Correct. So I'm basically, using it as a communication document where I am trying to, set the table, if you will. Now, however you read intention,
Well, wouldn't the seller benefit by at least playing the game a little bit versus being back on market?
Well, so remember, this goes back to what a listing agent says and what a seller's willing to do. Those are two totally different things almost 90% of the time. You know, the listing agent's responsibility is to be that strong arm. Like Thomas said, they have no intentions of doing it, but just because he states it and writes it doesn't actually mean the seller doesn't have the intention. They're just following the guidance of the listing agent. The sellers don't come up with this kind of verbiage. The seller didn't say, oh, I want to make sure that's included, Thomas. That's Thomas's idea.
and basically it's just don't nickel and dime me. That's all I basically said. Don't nickel and dime me. And I have also a policy that a seller does not do any repairs and a buyer does not allow seller to do any repairs.
Why is that?
Well, because if I am the buyer and I want the seller to fix something, the seller's going to have his brother-in-law come in with his, little chick toolkit and try to fix something, and it may look good, but it ain't done correctly.
Right.
No, thank you.
It's zip ties and bubble gum.
Correct. I want my guy doing it because it's my guy.
Right. Right.
Some
As
of those
well as if the seller
people
does
get
do
pretty
work
handy.
and it fails later, you're on the hook for something failing.
Right. There you go. So as is, I think it's important to include it, especially in a competitive scenario, but don't forget to include your objection and resolution deadlines. I think those have to be included. Appraisal gap coverage. Who can give us an overview of what appraisal gap coverage is? When is this not necessary? How about that?
Cash.
Cash, no appraisal, didn't even need an appraisal gap coverage. Anybody used appraisal gap coverage? Kristen, what would it have been advantageous? Or I guess we had talked about it. Remember the agent, they had it listed, I think it was at 550 and you guys went in at 570 and what
Mhm.
they ask.
They did ask them because there was some fear that the house wouldn't appraise. So what we did was because it was VA, we took the 15 grand that we were going to put down just in good faith to show. And then we moved that to cover potential gap.
There you go. So it was a shifting of funds is what it was. Kristen's scenario had a VA buyer that doesn't need a down payment, but was willing to put 15,000 down. Just as a gesture of good faith. Turns out that the funds were better utilized as an appraisal gap coverage. Let's use, Kristen's example. Let's say it actually purchase price 570, appraisal came back in at 570 with 15,000. What did it save the buyers at that point if it comes to value? It saves them that 15 grand, right? So instead of them being obligated to put that money down, they actually don't have to put that money down. And if the value comes, they may not have to touch that 15 grand. So it could be just money in their pocket.
That they could use to buy down their own rate since.
Right.
You should always check your appraiser's report as well. They may have missed something.
An error? What?
I'm in there. Good thing I got insurance. Oops.
Oops. Appraisal gap coverage, I think it's necessary these days. If Kristen's example as well, it ended up going what, 50 over ask? So we went 50 over ask. I think that's one of those scenarios, 50 over ask. If there's no other comps in the area that would reflect that price, does it do you any good to be 50,000 over if you can't actually get the 50,000 out of it? Then you end up 3.5 weeks down the road, buyer terminates because it's $50,000 cap coverage and they don't want to.
Or they don't have it.
Don't have it, right? So I think that's a savvy listing agent that knows the difference between, oh my gosh, get excited, we got 50 over. But did you actually, all right, can you get to the closing table with that, with no gap, with no coverage? Maybe not. That's where this is probably necessary. 50,000 over, maybe not as attractive as $25,000 gap coverage and $25,000 over. At least you can cover the gap.
Did you give me proof of funds for the appraisal gap coverage?
There you go. It's a good question.
So is that yes or no, Mr. Wempen?
That's a no.
Ah,
I didn't even give you a lender letter. I hope you didn't notice that.
so you gave me enough to show that you can do the earnest money and the cash at closing.
We're moving forward in good faith, Mr.
Okay.
John. Appraisal coverage is necessary. I think it's also important just to verify that those funds are available. You should be receiving, those proof of fund statements, period, either way. Calling the lender and receiving those proof of fund statements.
Proof of funds includes this appraisal gap.
I've had it to where I've called the lender and asked, hey, do they have these funds immediately available? And their answer was no. Well, thanks for being honest at the lending side, and thanks for my due diligence for actually checking in that buyer did have that. They didn't.
My brother's best friend did that. He told you.
But we're gonna get it. We're gonna get it at some point. Any questions about appraisal gap coverage? If you're on the list side, make sure it's included if you're over the value you believe it'll reach, and don't get too excited about people that just go in with a high purchase price without including it. And maybe this is the item that gets covered, countered. Buyer pays title and closing costs, and these actually might have changed. No. How does the buyer pay the title policy? Why would we? What's that?
Settlement statement.
There you go, settlement statement. Why would this be an attractive element? What's the cost of a title insurance policy?
1,200, 1,500.
1,200, 1,500. It really depends on the purchase price, but let's just call it on average $1,500. $1 million property, 2,000, 2,200 maybe. It's just another way for you to get more money into the seller's pocket in a competitive situation. What if your buyers don't have additional cash to do an appraisal gap? What if they don't have additional cash to do some of the other elements? Maybe including this might be something that's attractive. I think for me in particular, if I get an offer that has the seller paying everything, I mean, it's not attractive, and especially in a competitive situation. And these are, I mean, the biggest expense here is your title insurance policy, $1,500. The rest of it's peanuts, maybe a couple $100. So I think, you know, having buyer pay closing costs, buyer paying title is one of the lower cost elements that they can do to still look attractive to a seller.
Can VA and like FHA, can buyers still pay for those things?
I've never,
I can't pay for it, but I don't.
I couldn't tell you what they were or what they weren't, to where I think I just do it. I think I just end up putting it on the buyer. If we end up hearing about it later, then that's just an element of renegotiation at that point.
Okay.
It doesn't go to purchase price, so it doesn't go on the loan.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know any of the specifics of what to or what not to do, to where I write it in included, and if it's something that has to be renegotiated later. But I've never encountered that. I've never actually had to.
You've never actually had to give up a little bit of your commission as a buyer's.
Oh yeah, I've done that. I've
Okay.
definitely done that. Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely done that one.
Okay.
But that's it. I'd rather close the deal than worry about. Oh man. Right? Any questions about buyer paying title or closing costs?
Damn straight be special about those assessments. I'm buying the property free and clear. None of this. Nope. That's all on seller.
I think that that's a good point. What are the special assessments, and do we even know, or have we identified what those look like? So I like that. So I actually don't ever let my buyer pay special assessments if they exist. They're usually not cheap. And there's a reason the seller didn't pay for it.
Or there's a reason they're trying to sell before other people find out about the special.
I had a seller that did that to me. Jared, we want to sell before we have to tell anybody. I was like, you just told me, which means we got to tell everybody.
This is where you find them in the HOA documents. If it's been raised at a board meeting, we're considering, we may have to.
Special assessments, watch out for those. Always put it on the seller. Any other thoughts, comments, wishes on buyer title and buyer closing costs? Using and leveraging earnest money? What could this include? What does this look like? What does it mean? Anybody done it? Thomas, give us your example.
They wanted $5,000 earnest money. I gave them 25.
Okay.
Me
Leveraging
personally.
earnest money.
Basically, you're covering almost all of the cash, cash required.
Right.
I'm serious.
That's a chunk.
I'm putting it at risk.
Barely.
I'm putting it at risk.
Barely. And we all know. Yeah, so I've only almost lost earnest money one time, and it's because I didn't deliver a termination notice by the deadline and delivered it the next day, thinking that I had, and I didn't. And luckily I went back and forth, fought with it, and then I ended up eating a couple $100 out of 20 grand. So
Look at my straight face. It's at risk.
It is at risk.
It's not.
It is at risk. What other elements can we do to leverage earnest money? So Thomas used the example of increasing the amount. You asked for 5, we gave you 25. What other way can we leverage the earnest money?
Half is hard money,
There you go, non-refundable, right?
half.
And I've seen before where people say, once I get through inspection, my earnest money will go hard. Basically having a lot of confidence in their job and their loan. Let's make sure the property works for us. After that, they will not terminate.
So
I concur.
non-refundable earnest
I
money.
like limitations,
There you go.
not so much at risk.
Non-refundable earnest money once we achieve this date or achieve this
Resolution.
milestone.
Mhm.
Anybody else use any other ways of leveraging earnest money to make your offer more attractive? I think those are kind of the biggest ones. Increasing the limits and then offering a non-refundable portion at a time of seasoning or a time of.
With regards to a title company holding earnest money, if you do not, it's under the insurance statutes. Because the title company is a fiduciary for both parties, if there is a earnest money dispute, but if there is no filing of a lawsuit or mediation, the title company, if they give notice to the seller, once after the notice is given to seller, there's a 120-day latency period. So if a mediation has not been filed or a court case has not been filed, the title company has to give the money back after 120 days after notice to seller.
Oh, and doesn't it speak specifically in our contract to buy the duration of time before a seller has to actually initiate that dispute? If there is a dispute, what is that time frame that they have to kind of initiate that mediation request?
I do not believe that there's a time period.
I thought
It
it was
says
3
that it
days.
has to go to mediation first.
Well, I believe it's 3 days that they have to give notice. Okay, you want to keep the earnest money seller? Great, you've got 3 days then to send us over that request of mediation. I'll revisit the contract.
I need to revisit the contract.
There you go. I believe it's 3 days. And long story short, I say it all the time. I'm like, oh, that's fine. It sounds like your seller wants to dispute this. Send over the mediation request and I'll share it with my buyers. And that's usually enough to scare a seller into just signing it. Oh, wait, I actually have to do something.
Oh, wait, let me call my lawyer and put a notice in lieu. Notice Liz Pens.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't sell the property with a notice Liz Pens? Oh,
He'll sign it. They'll sign it real
they'll
quick.
sign it.
Yeah. I've never lost earnest money.
Go. Go.
Any questions about leveraging earnest money?
So you would just put this verbiage in additional provisions?
Yeah. If it applies.
You could also, I guess, if you were representing the seller, counter and add that.
Yeah. Yep.
And even if you're not serious about it, it buys you time to get more offers or negotiate with other potential buyers.
Right. Backup contract. Give an example. Anybody used a backup contract, buyer or a seller side? Anybody besides Thomas and Britt?
Personally, I was the backup.
You were the
And-
backup.
I was the backup and I lost out because I think the psychology is as soon as somebody knows, as soon as a buyer knows that somebody else wants it, they want it more.
Totally. I absolutely agree with what Kristen just said. I 100% agree with what Kristen said. Kristen just said, the perceived thought of somebody else getting the property is usually enough for the buyer that has the contract to not back out because they don't want somebody else to win. Yep.
I've gotten 2 buyers position. I've also had my $1.2 million list fall through, and we had a backup offer on that one. So, and the buyers knew about it. So
Wasn't enough to keep them.
it just depends. I totally understand the risk side of being like, oh, if there's a backup, they can use this in negotiation to where they can leverage that. It just,
But if it's the house your buyer wants, it also is our duty to do what they want to need as well, you know?
My preference is to not put it in writing. That's a backup offer.
And to be honest, that's my approach with my buyers. As I say, let's stay in a backup position, but let's not present a backup offer. I can call the agent every day and see how the contract's going. Hey, just checking in. Inspection was yesterday. How was resolution? You know, so we can stay in touch and keep our foot in the door without actually submitting that actual backup document.
Correct.
Okay. So that's my personal approach, is not to put my buyer in a backup position, but to keep my foot in the door with the agent to make sure that communication, or I'm the first person notified when that opening then comes. I don't let my buyers get leveraged, you know, through a contract. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? An example, anybody else been in a backup position or been in a listing scenario with a backup? Pretty straightforward. I think just on mine, I don't encourage my buyers to submit, but I definitely encourage, you know, them to let me stay in touch with it. You know, let me stay in touch with the agent. Let me make sure that when they get through certain milestones, and if they get through it, we probably don't have a chance. From the stats at the beginning, how many are back on market for us? Back on market, 100 so almost a quarter of the new homes, so almost 800 homes every 7 days, almost 200 of them are back on the market. So still 25%, 20 to 25%. And that's what I said here was 20%.
Do you find that the 20% stays pretty even, kind of regardless of market conditions? Or do you think that when, like, say, if rates fall to 5 and the hordes of buyers come out and people are.
So this is from 2021, and we saw the stats at the beginning. This is 2023, another 2 years later, a shifting into change of the market slightly, but we're still seeing 20 to 25%. So I think it's
yeah.
And I say it to my buyers, 20% of the time we have a chance. I mean, so I definitely don't discourage them, but I also say, let's not get leveraged. Let me just stay in touch with them.
And I think when it's more competitive and buyers are going in 100,000 above list price with appraisal gap coverage and limited inspection, I feel like chances are higher that they're gonna fall out.
What's the benefit to having a signed and executed backup offer though for your buyer?
They're definitely next in line.
They're already next in line. They're immediately put into first position and at the terms that were agreed at the beginning. So there is a benefit to it. You already have the terms ironed out. There's no more competition. You don't have to compete another 3 days down the road to hope that they don't get it or don't get it. So actually having the executed backup does put them in a stronger position because it's immediate. Backup contract verbiage. I put a little notice. Yeah.
I have a question, but if they're a backup offer, then they can no longer submit other offers, correct?
Why not?
You can rescind your backup.
You could write another offer, get one the next day, and then rescind your backup.
Gotcha.
It's all good faith. So they're not delivering earnest money. They're not tying up properties. They're not doing multiple inspections, but they are allowed to shop in my mind. It is in good faith. They're being honest, you know. They want this one, but that doesn't mean that they get the second one they want. If they don't get this one, good thing we're still here. oh, we did get that, let's get out here.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So
So
if
I
you're
would,
gonna rescind an offer, you gotta put it in writing that you're rescinding it.
absolutely.
A phone call will not get you, a yes. Verbal is, actual knowledge, not constructive knowledge, but I would still, in the formalities of the contract. If you're going to rescind your offer, you do it in a phone call immediately when that decision is made, followed up by a email.
And let's just be honest, nothing in our line of work is done over the phone. If it's not in writing, it doesn't count. Any questions, thoughts on backup contracts? 20% of the time it happens, so it's not like it's no chance. You've got some chance. Yeah. Listing agent advice and seller thresholds. Ask specific questions. I'm a big believer in asking specific questions. What are the other competing offers? What's the price at? Not, oh, do you have offers? Oh yeah, we've got offers. Okay, that doesn't help us.
Well, let's get it done.
Will this get it done? I think that this whole portion of it is asking questions that get the contract pulled together and not just fuel. I'll be honest. I think most agents are actually willing to participate and keep pushing those terms and price. So why would they not share that? If you encounter a listing agent that won't share terms or price, I usually get creative and I'll say, okay, fine. If we come in at 570, blink twice if that'll put us in a first position. I can't see you. I'm on the phone. Like it's a joke, right? But yeah, 570 would put you there. They'll usually say, yes, that puts you up front. So even if you have to start throwing out numbers or you have to throw out terms, hey, if we included this, would it be more attractive? Hey, if we included, 50% non-refundable earnest money, would that be attractive? If we included an escalation clause, would that be attractive? One of the questions here is what does your sellers need? And I always ask, what do you need? What do you recommend as a listing agent? Should we include any as-is clauses, appraisal coverage, escalation? What does the seller's need for post-occupancy agreements, closing date, purchase price? This also could go back to a seller's acceptance bonus. Well, my sellers aren't really looking to beat everybody up, but just want somebody to come in strong. Hey, well, we'll come in strong and include a sign-on bonus if they sign before the end of the weekend. Here's one. Would a seller be willing to send us a contract and we'll just sign it? Can a listing agent present a buyer with an offer?
Absolutely.
Yes.
When the market is horrible, that's your go-to.
Right. Hey, here's the terms that the sellers are wanting and looking for. If you guys sign it, we're solid. I asked the listing agent, hey, if you guys you've seen what we presented, would you be willing to counter us immediately or send us the offer that they want? Can I stay in touch and get countered first? My buyers want this home. And that's usually the question I ask. I like coming in first and I like asking to be countered first. Hey, we came in first. Can we please get countered first? If you won't tell me the terms that we need to be at, just counter us first. I think here, as a listing agent, one of my pet peeves is getting the random text message that says, hey, I just sent you an offer. No name, no agent, no property address. Oh, I just sent you something. And I always write back. I'm always like, hello, mystery agent. What is your name? Right? Call the agent. And Kristen, you and I have been talking about this a lot. Are you making friends with the other agent? A lot of this has to do with, unfortunately, sometimes if agents want to work with a particular agent, they start advocating for your offer. Hey, I've got a competent individual. They seem like they're communicating well. They presented a solid offer. Everything looks clean and tight. They've been flexible and willing. The advocacy from the other side is almost just as important as the actual offer that we present. What happens if I don't get my offer accepted? I gotta go do this all over again. I'm effective because I don't want to have to keep doing this. Like, I'd rather have a contract accepted so I can stop doing that. I don't need practice writing offers anymore. My clients don't want me practicing anymore. No, my clients want the contract. That's what my job is to get the contract. Ask specific questions. You'd be surprised how many agents that don't call the listing agent and how many agents that do even call but don't ask specific questions. Any wishes, hopes, thoughts, comments about the conversation with the listing agent? Is anybody feel like there's something they can't ask or maybe something they can't disclose?
What's your social security number?
I'll give you that off the phone.
Not gonna get you far.
Yeah, you're right. Right, that's fine. You can identity theft me. That's fine. Your lender makes the call. Does everybody have their lender reaching out and calling the actual listing agents when they submit an offer? I hope so.
With the intent of finding out. the
In my, yes.
Yeah.
Does it say, call what?
Shh, don't read it. I think that's a big thing is having a lender that's willing to actually make those phone calls for you. What's the benefit of having your lender reach out?
You're a team. They're in the know.
Your team, they're in the know. It saves the listing agent from having to chase and try and find out or ask those questions for the actual lender. I would say a good lender can also find out where you're actually at. And not only that, a lot of the lenders that we work with all the same agents. This is not that big of a network. Oh my gosh, I know the listing agent. I'm gonna give her a call right now. So sometimes that definitely actually helps us. Hey, I just talked to the agent. They said that you guys are actually 5,000 under the next one. You might want to resubmit. Maybe your lender's asking more specific questions than you are. But I like that. It makes you seem like a bigger team. Love letters. Thomas, what's the rules on love letters?
Acceptable unless stated, do not supply.
I like that. Do I submit love letters for my buyers? Yep. Why do I submit love letters for my buyers? Not for them, but on behalf of them. Because if
And
it
even if the
works,
seller's agent says, I don't want them, you can still supply them.
and I still do.
Pull on
Yes.
those heartstrings.
And let's be honest, that's exactly what it is. Most sellers still kind of go off of that like old handshake. Oh, we want to know who's going to buy our house, who's going to live. I Facebook stalked them, and it looks like they do this. Like sellers do like to know who's getting their house. Sellers like to know that kind of stuff. And I think by sharing that love letter, it either is going to help or it's not. But I would say most of the time, at least if it's being presented, it has a chance of helping. So did you hear what Thomas said, though? If it says no, you can still present it. Just doesn't mean it's going to show up. It's not going to be included. Can you include a love letter into your actual email that you just send over with the breakdown of what's included? Sure. Right? I think sharing your buyer's story helps, leveraging heartstrings helps. People most of the time, that are selling are still, they're not investors. They're not selling because they're looking just for money. Most sellers are selling because they're in a position, maybe they got to transition, transfer, change, but they still want the home to go to somebody that they believe deserves it or would have loved it or treasure or appreciate it. I'll be honest, in my love letters, I include silly things like, let's say you have a particular artist that's hanging all over the wall. Oh my gosh, my buyers noticed that you had Prozac, or my buyers noticed that you decorated and picked this color, or you picked this kind of decor. Speaking to them specifically, their home and their details, I think is where my buyers usually win with the letter. Any thoughts, love letters? Any experience? There we go. Tight dates and deadlines. What happens when we receive a sloppy offer as a listing agent? How do we feel about the agent?
Makes us feel like the whole transaction is going to be sloppy and ineffective.
Oh, the whole thing's gonna be this way, huh, Cece? Right. That's exactly how I feel. If you put that little effort into what is the most important document you delivered, it reminds me that it's going to be the quality is going to be reflective throughout the rest of the transaction. And that's stuff that I share. There's lots of holes in here. There's a lot of errors. There's a lot of places. We've got a big counter if this is our only offer. So I think,
What do you- Sorry, what do you do with an offer? I just had an offer in and they put the seller's name in and they put some other woman's name that is completely not party to the transaction. How does that bode for the transaction? I don't know who this.
Copy a contract.
they replicated.
I was like,
They got lazy and didn't want to write a fresh contract. And that's where I do not encourage people to use templated contracts. You should write it fresh every single time.
it's like, oh, great. This doesn't bode well for the whole thing.
Right. Yay. Sometimes we're in a scenario where that's the only option we've got too.
Mm.
So I think keeping dates and deadlines tight is important. I think it shows the buyer's willingness to kind of move forward and proceed. Dragging out an inspection for a couple weeks just isn't common. It isn't a common practice. If you can't get it done in a week, you should be concerned.
It's to the best interest of both seller and buyer to know whether or not the deal is going through in 10 days.
I like that. That seems fair. Everybody knows what's going on. Send offer package, promote the elements of and benefits, always including an offer summary. Introduce the buyers and what they love about the home. So that's incorporating that love letter right up front. Key terms and elements that are favorable to the seller and the seller's agent. The buyer's strengths and dedication to the completion of this transaction. My buyers don't want to lose this. This is the one. Let us know if there's anything needed. Buyer flexibility and other perks. Buyer covered title insurance and also covered all closing costs outside of your special assessments. Proof of funds. Are we including the proof of funds? Are you including the lender letter and having the lender call? I think this is that one shot. This is your first impressions count kind of a scenario. If you don't present this up front, you're going to wish you had later, and wishing you had later isn't going to get it done, isn't going to get you the contract. Love letter from the buyer, short, sweet, counts. Make it personalized to the property. That's what I was saying earlier. Note things that are particular to the property. We love what you did with the barn. We love what you did with the garage. That's perfect for their toys. That's why they wanted it. Right. Usually the things that they loved about their home, the things that your people love about the home is the same things that they probably loved about the home as well.
So that falling down barn, you just love the rustic appeal.
Right. I love that barnwood. Post-closing occupancy agreement if it applies. Escalation clauses, appraisal gap coverage, above asking price will always help. Seller's acceptance bonuses. Be descriptive, be specific, ensure that you highlight and promote each one of them. I think that actually sending over that little breakdown of who you are, what you've included, what the buyer's willing to do goes a long way. It also kind of helps set up the agent to understand what they're getting ready to read throughout your offer as well. So it kind of puts a little smile on their face when they see a lot of the perks and benefits already. They're like, okay.
Yeah, when they first opened the email, jump in.
Oh, I sent you an offer. Okay, mystery person. I think this is where we can separate ourselves or distinguish ourselves from other agents, and then really get the advocacy of that listing agent. This goes hand in hand with the phone calls we make, the specific questions we ask, but just kind of the cherry on top.
Make sure they match.
Make sure they match, right? Yeah, don't copy somebody else's contract and then write something that doesn't count. So that's it. So I mean, it's really straightforward. All of these things can be included into one offer. Long story short, though, putting it together and putting that kind of presentation together is kind of the cherry on top, and that last little kind of finish that you can put to it. Having the relationship with the listing agent is imperative and important. You know, statistically, 20% of all contracts fall out. So putting in a backup position is possible, right? All of these things are kind of designed to help us win. Did anybody have any questions? Do we not cover anything somebody wanted to know more about? Don't be quiet now.
Check the FERPTA box.
Check the FERPTA box. Anybody know what the FERPTA box is? And that might be something that doesn't apply in Florida, but I would guess that it still would.
Resident or something?
A
Being
a foreign individual. Thomas, why
Like
are you check the FERPTA box? Cece, you won.
FERPTA box. Two reasons on my end. One, has the seller actually read the contract, or did they just glaze right over? If they glaze right over one thing, they probably glaze right over a couple other things.
Yep.
Communicates to me who I'm dealing with. Secondly, if you buy or if you buy a property from a foreign person who is a French citizen, on the day of closing, they get on that flight and they fly over to France. Uncle Scam says, "Hey, where's my capital gains tax?" Oh, I have no jurisdiction over somebody who lives in France. Hey, Mr. Buyer, I'll take that capital gains tax from you because you have something to lose and I have jurisdiction over you.
Right.
It's true, and it's so crazy. I don't know how they have that ability, but yeah.
But everybody acknowledges and signs that at closing as well, that they are not a foreign individual, a foreign party to the contract.
But I still at least have a breach of contract lawsuit.
Right. Well, and I like Thomas's, first point is are they actually reading it? And I'll be honest with you, I can't tell you how many times I've had listing agents call me and say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't notice that there was concessions in there and I didn't tell my seller." So
That's so sad.
Are you actually reading the offer? Do you actually know what's included in the contract you've received?
And if they're not a foreign persons, who cares? It's
Who
going to be
cares?
all the forms are going to be signed, and the affidavit of citizenship is going to be signed at the closing. So if they're not a foreign person, whatever. Don't
No
care.
harm, no foul.
No harm, no foul.
Yep.
But if they are a foreign person,
Harm and foul, possibly.
possibly.
There you go.
But at least I have a breach of contract claim. And of course, the selling agent is going to be named defendant. So I can at least recover from their E&O policy.
Right.
Thomas,
Right.
are you saying check the FERPTA box even if they aren't foreign? Is that what you're just saying?
Check the FERPTA box every time.
Really?
Every time.
On every offer he writes.
So Cece, you skip right over that page, don't you?
Yeah, right.
Thomas, do you get countered a lot with that being removed?
No, I get the phone call, they're not a foreign persons. I say, okay, good. So they'll sign all the affidavits, et cetera, title, closing.
And it doesn't have to be taken off. There is no negative impact to having it on.
No, I was just thinking like in a competitive situation, like if they have to counter or getting it signed.
And they could sign it immediately with no
Yeah.
adverse effect. Right.
Correct. There's no adverse effect. Do you have a petty selling agent who just wants to call you and berate you? Okay. How'd that feel? You feel superior?
Feel better.
Good for you.
Feel better.
As long as you accepted the offer, berate me.
There you go.
I take no offense.
Good stuff. Anybody else have anything? Wishes, hopes, comments? We covered a lot. I'll send this back out, the recording and the presentation, so everybody has access to it. If you have any specific questions or scenarios, a contract comes up and you have one, reach out to me or your broker directly. We're definitely available to help. Only call Thomas if it's gone too far and you want to throw him under the bus.
Bum bum.
Right. Right. Yeah, don't call him proactively, just reactively.
Please, please, proactively.
That's how he prefers it.
Before the excrement has hit the rotating device.
Just spraying it. Right. Well, thanks, everybody. We're all wrapped up. If you guys need anything at all, let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy Egypt.
Hey,
Thank you.
it's bedtime.
Thanks,
Not
guys.
quite.
Bye, guys.
Bye.